Oh, no,
Okay.
yeah, we're here to talk about aircraft maintenance and everything that encompasses.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you for joining us on our very first episode, our first podcast episode of Nuts About Thrust. This is where we're gonna sit down with Jon at the moment, and he's gonna give us a little bit of insight onto what's going on over at the Thrust Institute of Maintenance.
My name is Jon Dillenberg. I'm the director of Thrust Institute of Maintenance. We're an FAA-approved Part 147, which is an aircraft maintenance training school. So we are approved by the FAA as a Part 147 AMTS is what it's referred to as.
AMTS.
Yeah, so aircraft maintenance training school. So that's the FAA's term for an aircraft mechanic, is an aircraft maintenance technician.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we talk about not all the time, but in every other country, an AMP or an AMP mechanic is referred to as, in Canada, they're called AMEs, so aircraft maintenance engineer. In Australia, they're called LAMEs, is what they say.
Yeah.
It's a thing, but it's a licensed aircraft maintenance engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So every other country in the world kind of uses that term engineer for what it is that we are licensed to do in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things I would personally like to see the FAA change, is going from being a technician or a mechanic to being, an engineer, because really you're certifying, we're certifying everything from small general aviation airplanes all the way to, Airbus A380s, a double-decker, 500 passenger aircraft.
So personally, I don't know everything that's going to go into being what the U.S. or FAA calls an aircraft mechanic, but that's like a lot of responsibility. And so you're the director over there at the Institute of Maintenance?
Yeah, I'm director and I'm one of the instructors as well.
Okay, gotcha. So you're actually also instructing classes. That's good. Yeah, I've seen you do it before. I was over there when Jon was teaching people how to weigh an airplane. I think I learned a thing or two. I think I'm practically in the class.
Was I on the scales, like shifting my weight side to side? So
Jon likes to joke around just a little bit, but he was on the scales, moving around a little bit. No, I did want to ask you a little bit about that though. How long have you been over at? It's a little bit newer than Thrust Flight is, although it's a parent. What is that? A partner company.
Yeah.
How long have you
been over there? We're an affiliate of Thrust Flight.
An affiliate,
right?
Okay. Gotcha. And how long have you been over there, if you don't mind me asking?
I started in October of 2022,
Uh-huh.
And we were working on, and we started the certification process. So the certification process took us about 11 months from the time that I came on board to when we were certified as a Part 147. So we were certified officially August 30th of 2023.
Yeah.
And we started our first cohort, or our first class, November 6th of 2023.
And I've met those students, so they're cool kids, but they've seemed like they're not kids, they're young adults, they really are. But talking to them, it seems like they're really picking up a lot of things. Even just in the past, however much time I've been here, I've seen them like pick up a lot of different information. Yeah.
We refer to ourselves as an accelerated program. It's the same traditional number of hours that you would get in a junior college or something, but we are coming to school 5 days a week for 8 hours at a time, right? So we're a 40-hour work week. And what that allows us to do is fit a lot more like hands-on practical into our curriculum, but also to cover things in less amount of days, not necessarily less hours.
I mean, you're putting it on a time frame to where the same amount of hours can be achieved quicker. Is that what you're saying?
Essentially. So the Part 147 rule from the FAA changed about a year and a half ago, and we are certified under the new rule. So the new rule does not have a minimum number of hours. But even under the old minimum number of hours, we're, our program, goes farther than that. But we're based on a credit hour system, and those credit hours are based on a number of hours per week. Is how that translates.
Okay.
So we're really a performance-based school, is how I like to say it, versus just a clock hour school where you have to be in the building a certain number of hours, no matter what your progress is.
Right. And but even so, the plan is to have students there from 8 to 4 each day, so it's like a full-time job, right?
Right. So we're preparing them to have a full-time job, and it's more than just being an aircraft mechanic. It's more than just being an AMP. It's more than just learning how to do a compression check on an engine. It's about how do you speak to your boss? What happens when you're late in the morning? What happens when you're caught on your phone when you're supposed to be paying attention? There's all these things that we're really trying to instill, like good work ethic, and have I call it a safe place to fail, right? Like it's a safe place to mess something up, right? Because we really learn from that.
Yeah, and not in a place where you're relying on your job. You're not messing up there where it might be a little more detrimental. Well, it sounds like they get to have experience that replicates what it's like to be in the industry already, and it sounds like you're able to do that because you were in the industry. I think I know a little bit about how you started and got into aviation. I'm a little curious if you could tell them, hey, what was the first thing you did in aviation?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been in aviation my entire adult life.
Uh-huh.
I'm not a person that grew up with aviation. My family is not, there's not something that they ever did. But I was, I was 18 years old, and I got a call from an Army recruiter, and they were like, "Hey, you ever thought about joining the Army?" And I, at that point, really had no idea what I wanted to do with my life.
Right, so you heard them out.
Yeah, so I listened to the guy for a little bit, and I went and took the ASVAB, the entry test, and they're like, "Well, you pretty much qualified for whatever jobs you wanted to do." And we were talking about things, and we talked about military intelligence was one thing I was pretty interested in, and we talked about that for a while. And then they're like, "Oh, well, we have the you could pick any of the aviation fields as well. We have power, prop and rotor mechanic, they called it, or repairman."
Oh, and
then I picked, and then they had this term crew chief. Like, I was like, "Well, that sounds cool. Like, what is that?" And this was, not that I'm that old, but I am kind of old. It was really before the internet. So I'm like looking around trying to figure out things to research, and I could pick between the OH-58, the Chinook, the Apache, and the Blackhawk.
Oh, that's great.
And I was like, well, a utility aircraft seems way more translates way more to a civilian job. I'd never planned on making a career out of the military. It was just it was going to be a thing to do for a while.
Transitionary, right?
And so I picked Blackhawk repairman, which was a super cool job. I ended up being a crew chief, have about 1,700 hours, riding around in the back. Lots of, 1,000 hours of MVGs. I became what was referred to as a flight instructor for non-rated crew members. So for other, crew chiefs, I trained door gunners before we went and played in the desert for a while, a couple different times.
So did you have to fly? Did you have to get your like? Did you have to be a pilot to be able to maintain or anything?
No. So the way that
make sure I'm
So the military or the Army has what they refer to as rated crew members. So a rated crew member holds like a rating to operate, like fly the particular aircraft, and then there's non-rated crew members, which are the crew chiefs, right? So you sit in the back, you operate systems, you're there in case there's a maintenance problem, you do airspace surveillance. When you're deployed, you shoot a door gun. We operate Bambi buckets for firefighting, operate, rappel teams, fast ropes, parachute, people, jumping out of the back, all the like cool stuff, right?
That's crazy. Yeah.
And I remember like when I graduated from my advanced individual training, like the movie Black Hawk Down had just come out.
Oh yeah, and I've never watched it either.
Have you never seen it?
I've never actually watched it.
Oh, you're such a baby.
That's how I feel.
But that was like, it was cool to see like guys in the movies doing the job that I had, right?
Yeah.
And then my first duty station, so that I graduated from AIT like the middle of December.
Yeah.
And my first duty station was in Korea, and so I had like 2 weeks at home. So I went home, watched the movie, thought it was super cool, and then I go to this unit, and like my platoon sergeant had like been deployed with those guys.
Oh, really? With the guys that the movie was made about?
So he had been in that unit for a long time. He was kind of in his retirement stages, wanted something that was a little less fast paced. So he had moved on, and here's this guy that like had been in Somalia in the early 90s, like doing cool stuff. And this is prior to, it's after 9/11 technically, but only 6 months
before. Yeah. So
before the big
acting on that particular,
before the big war, before the, I guess the war's over, but before
the latent war.
Before the second Iraq stuff kind of kicked off. So it was really interesting to get to talk to somebody that had taken those aircraft and gone into combat operations, had gone into, austere environments and operated those aircraft. Because when you're maintaining an aircraft, which really at the end of the day is what you do as a crew chief, right? Like you're making sure the aircraft's ready to go, right? You're loading passengers and making sure they're safe, but you're also you're doing the pre-flights, you're doing the preventive maintenance, you're doing the large inspections on the aircraft to make sure that it's always ready.
Yeah.
So it was really neat to meet somebody that had been operating the aircraft in the desert next to the ocean, like talking about all the, you have to rinse the compressor on the turbine engines every day.
There's a lot of insight.
Like a lot of other stuff, like talking about, hey, these were the problems we had with lots of sand ingestion or lots of, salt water or things like that. And like, this is where we found corrosion. And I learned so much from him just in that short time. I think I was only with him for like 7 months before he went back to the US. But I learned a ton from him about just all sorts of different things, right? Like when you're a young soldier, you kind of grasp onto somebody, right?
I'm sure you're just out there.
Right. And they teach you all these things and they're really influential in your life, right? I was 19 years old. I had no idea what was going on with my life.
Yeah. Especially over there. And what, were you on a ship? Or like?
Well, no, I was in Korea.
Oh, you said in Korea. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to go to Korea. So I'm like in a whole new, I'm in another world.
Yeah.
No one speaks English. I'm at this small air base just south of Seoul. Just super fun.
Yeah. I mean,
like from all different aspects. So like,
right. I mean, you're 19, you're in a new country, you're living life, and you're learning these awesome things from this person. Yeah. I mean, last time we talked, I didn't get to hear about that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. That's the way you got to learn. What I'm curious about is, what I know is after the military, you did move into working with Bell, right? And then you got into a somewhat decent position there.
Yeah. So when I transitioned out of the military, I went to work for Bell Helicopter working on what was referred to at the time as the ARH program. So this was in June of 2008. I got my AMP as I'd gotten licensed as I got out of the Army. Didn't know exactly what I was going to do. Got offered a job at American Airlines to go be an aircraft mechanic for them. But at the time, the market was significantly different than it is today.
Yeah.
It was something, I got a job offer, full-time employment, but it was like $12.50 something cents an hour.
Yeah. And even back then, I mean, that's
you're talking, this is not like 1980. This is 2008.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's not,
like I made more money in the Army.
Wow.
So for a long time, that's how aircraft maintenance was. Like when you started, you didn't make very much money and it was never going to be a super high paying career. And I had an opportunity at Bell where I was working as a training analyst. So we were developing a training program for the ARH to train the new mechanics that were going through school. Maybe I should back up a little bit. When I was in the Army, I had lots of training roles.
Oh, you're right.
So I was like I said, I was a standardization instructor. So I was in charge of like a training, I was in charge of multiple instructors that were giving instruction to.
Because at first you were chief repairman, and then you kind of like step up a little bit and say, "Hey, I'm making sure that many people are doing their job."
Yeah, so I became certified as a crew chief, and then I became certified as what the Army calls a flight instructor. They have flight instructors that train crew chiefs, and they have instructor pilots that train the new pilots, right?
Right.
So I was a flight instructor, worked in the standardization department, and then I became a standardization instructor where I was in charge of basically the battalion's worth of training.
Okay.
So I had, it was 15 flight instructors that reported through me, and then we were training. So we had 45 aircraft, so 110 individual crew, non-rated crew members who I was responsible for their training.
Okay, well that's a big. I mean, it's kind of a big number, and that's
that's
kind of crazy.
And I was like 25 years old.
Yeah, right.
It's like it's kind of crazy to think about, the difference of like what I today at 40. I'm 41. I'm not 42 yet. Okay. At 41, what I think of a 25-year-old versus what
you were doing at 25.
Yeah, but I still don't think I knew what I was doing. I was just a young kid. Like,
do you know what you're doing now?
Yeah.
right.
No, I mean,
you did that at 25, and now it comes full circle all the way at 41. I mean, I feel like
so I worked on that program for about 6 months, and the Army ended up canceling that program. It was late 2008 into 2009. If you think about the U.S. economy, right, kind of crashed. So it didn't make a lot of sense for the Army to be spending $500 million to replace an aircraft that they didn't really need to replace.
Yeah.
So that program canceled, and I was working for Bell Helicopter, and so I had no job. And so I went around and interviewed at a lot of different places, and I ended up becoming an instructor at the Bell Training Academy, teaching type courses on the Bell 412 is what I initially started with. And so I taught what they refer to as field maintenance. Field maintenance is basically, we would teach everything from, I called it, nose to tail. So we taught all of the systems and all of the inspections for the entire aircraft and how they operate to give people type ratings. So, the U.S. has type ratings for pilots, but does not have type ratings for mechanics. Outside the U.S., there are type ratings for mechanics.
Okay.
So that was our core business, was about 60% international. With that job, I gained a lot of international experience. I know we talked about I've like literally worked on 6 continents,
all over the world. I mean,
all over the world.
Like, so.
It was a fantastic time. I'm in my
training though, right?
Training.
Yeah,
right?
Which is wild. Like you found yourself in the training in the military, and then came out of it already. And I've been training again.
I've been pretty much doing training my whole life. Now, I don't just sit at a desk and hit through PowerPoint slides. Like I've been conducting. Bell has a very high standard for what their training is delivered. Those courses are not inexpensive. I think today, when I left Bell in 2022, a Bell 412 course is somewhere around $17,000 for a few weeks.
Wow.
So you're talking very significant amount of money. But that course was very detailed, very in depth, and people really did learn. You could be a mechanic that had been maintaining Bell 412s for 20 years and come and really learn something.
Yeah.
So we put a lot of effort into that. When I first started doing it, I spent lots of late nights. I'd be up studying and preparing the night before for my lessons the next day, until midnight. And, I had class started at 7:30 the next morning. And, I did that over and over again for several, for years really.
Yeah.
And I always kind of I eventually became a supervisor in that department, and I did become the manager of technical training for Bell Helicopter. And I always told my new instructors when I would hire them, like, hey, you're not going to be like confident teaching this single class that I'm teaching and I'm asking you to teach for 2 or 3 years. Right. You're going to run through this iteration of this same material. The material is covered in 3 to 4 weeks, depending on 2, 3, or 4 weeks, depending on what you're covering. But you're not going to be like, I'm not going to, if you come to me and say that you're totally proficient at the end of the year, I'm going to know that you're not teaching to the standard that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Right. Like you should be able to spit these numbers off of limits and, hydraulic pressures. And you should be able to I should be able to walk up to you at any time and you could explain to me the entirety of how the hydraulic system operates.
Right.
Right. Explain to me the inner workings of a hydraulic servo. Like that's the level of expertise that we demanded. And so it was a really interesting place to work. I really loved it. As a manager, I had oversight over multiple locations in several different countries. So I gained a lot of experience of how to manage people, not just in person, but managing people when they're afar.
Yeah.
And my team did travel pretty significantly.
Yeah.
Right. So, I had instructors that were based in Dallas that would spend 200 days a year on the road.
Yeah.
Just depending on the year. Depending on what was going on, the contracts and different things. And I traveled a lot.
Yeah.
And I really
even with
it.
Bell, like, so from the military, because were you in Korea the whole time when you
No. So I came back, I was stationed at Fort Hood, and then,
okay.
And then I did the Fort Hood, the desert, back to Fort Hood.
Right. So you've been traveling even before and once you got
your
civilian job.
And the traveling as a civilian was significantly different.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
I did travel a lot when I was in the military, and I was gone for a long time, but I would not even compare, like even start to compare the traveling. It's much different when you're, I think my first international trip, I was in my early 30s. So I might have been 30 years old, 31 years old.
And you were doing this with Bell?
I was doing this with Bell. So I started at Bell when I was 25. And then I moved to the training department. I was getting ready to turn 26. And then, or I was 26, getting ready to turn 27. And so I transferred over to the training academy, but like I said, it takes several years for you to really be.
Yeah. Like to really get your hands on. And
really get your hands on and feel good what you're doing. And when you're like at the training academy, like I'm given a block of instruction, and then I teach for an hour and a half, and then I take a break, right?
Yeah.
And I'd scurry out the back of the classroom and run to my desk to look at my notes or whatever. So one of the things like that we would do with newer instructors is you didn't really go travel, right? So what you had as a resource when you were there in the building teaching those classes is you had everybody else that had been an instructor for 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? I had a phone that I could call someone in engineering to ask a question to,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's how you learn and really become like what is considered like an expert on that particular model that you're teaching.
Yeah.
And I eventually started teaching like aircraft track and balance. So I did that for all models. I did, so a helicopter has blades that spin, right?
Right.
You know, I'm sure you guys have all
Yeah.
seen one, right? Those blades don't just automatically all fly together. So you have to do balancing to make sure that the entire rotor system is balanced. And you also have to do tracking to make sure that they all fly like in the same plane.
Right.
So that was one of the kind of the courses that I would teach.
Mm-hmm.
I also ended up teaching component overhaul. So we would overhaul, like go through and teach people, certify people to overhaul the components, you know, the main transmission, the drive shafts, the rotor systems.
Yeah.
You know, all of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Like there's a lot you had to do. Yeah.
There's a whole lot of things that you learn. And it's been a long time since I've actually done it, but there were, you know, kind of the way we would, you know, test a new instructor is you pick up a gear, be like, hey, what's the wear limits on the teeth of this gear?
Yeah.
And the instructor would not only have to know what component that gear comes out of, but like we expected them to know the wear limits, but also be able to go open a book and find it like within 30 seconds, right? Like they need to be intimately familiar with all of the tech data because we're trying to train people to a certain standard.
Right.
Right.
And that makes sense. Yeah. Well, I think it's, if I were a student coming to what we call TIM, Thrust Institute of Maintenance, to hear background like you have, where not only have you had to be super familiar with so many different parts of an aircraft, especially around helicopters or being in the military and being so well traveled, I think I'd feel a little more at ease knowing that you also trained so many people to do so many different things.
So the most important thing to us when we're training a new AMT student is that they understand how to use technical data, right? So, you know, you're never going to be able to you should never memorize every task, right? But you need to be proficient at, hey, I know exactly where I'm going to find this procedure in the manual. I can go find this quickly, right? And I have lots of experience doing things with my hands. Like I know how to use all the tooling. I know how to use all the measuring equipment. I am intimately familiar with inspection techniques and practices.
Right.
We were visiting with a local designated maintenance examiner, and he was talking about all the practical tasks that could come up. And he was saying, you know, something like 4,000 different practical tasks. So if we were to try to train every single individual practical task that a student could have on their test, was 4,000 tasks, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
Right? It's a lot.
Yeah.
But what we're doing and what every school is doing is we're training to the airman certification standards that the FAA puts out. And under each one of those certification standards, there could be 10 tasks that they could get trained on. And we're teaching them how to use technical data so that no matter what maintenance manual I put in front of you, you understand how a maintenance manual is organized and set up, where to find the information you're looking for, and how to use the tooling in order to do that. Right? Like the DME had this example of he had a student had a practical task of changing an inner tube in a tire. And the guy got the tire, said, okay, that's the bolt. I'm going to take it out. And he just was sitting there, and he said it was literally 5 minutes he turned the bolt.
Yeah.
The other side had a nut.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So the student had studied a lot, did really well on all the written exams, did well on the oral exam, but it had no experience using tools, using their hands. Right.
Because you would know if it's spinning like that.
Right. Yeah. And there is a factor of being nervous with the test.
Absolutely.
And all of those other things. But like if you've never taken apart a wheel or never taken out hardware, or your school didn't focus on making sure that you did more practical, right? And just was totally concerned with your book knowledge and passing and getting super high marks and grades on those written tests, right? I think that's just kind of the mentality that some,
right.
I don't want to say that schools have that mentality because, you know, I'm not going to talk bad about other people, but we're doing a good balance. I think we have a good balance of both.
Yeah.
Right.
Were you actually in the hangar?
We're in the hangar.
Yeah.
We're asking questions out of the book. Like we're asking those like types of oral questions that they would get, but when we're in a different environment. Right?
Yeah.
We're taking things apart. As the students are taking things apart, we have an instructor that's there that's able to ask them questions. Hey, why are you doing this? What's going on? Right?
Yeah.
What are you looking for? And that comes with part of us having smaller class sizes than what is traditional at the larger schools.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we've talked about kind of that's one of the things that I think really sets us apart, and it's true. A single instructor cannot watch 25, 30 people. There's no way.
Right.
And so 25 is the maximum with the FAA certification, but I have heard that there are schools with more than 25 people in a class.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no way that instructor can watch those 25 students. So if you have 25 students out doing practical tasks, what they're doing is, 2 or 3 of them are doing a practical project together, and then they are bringing that project to their instructor to get graded.
Yeah.
There's no one watching them during the process, right? So
it's not really a lot of instructing.
There's no instructing. You get like guidance at the beginning, and then they go do, right? But you don't have someone like, hey, what are you doing? Think about this, right? And with smaller groups, we have, depending on the project, we group people in 2 or 3 man groups per person.
Right.
And so the instructor can walk around and talk to 4 groups doing a practical project, 6 groups doing a practical project. Like, hey, what are you doing? And he's able to pay attention to everything that's going on and really have a grasp of that it is. When the groups get too large, there's no way that an individual person can watch them.
Keep track of all of that stuff. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think I remember I've talked to the students and I've seen that they are always comfortable asking questions because you guys seem so available to them. And so that makes me think, oh, it'd be nice to go somewhere where you can get that sort of environment where I feel comfortable asking. I mean, I remember one of my jobs, I thought my favorite thing about that job wasn't about the job itself. It was the ability to ask questions and learn what I needed to learn. So I could see the value in that.
Yeah, that's absolutely like the environment that, and that starts at the top, right? Like we're all available anytime to anyone. Patrick has an office in our facility, and the students talk to him and ask him questions. I'm always available. The instructors understand that this is a place where the students can fail safely. We don't want them to hurt themselves, but sometimes you have to make a mistake in order to learn from it, right? So we let them, get just a little bit too far and then come in and go, hey, think about this, stop what you're doing for a minute, let's have a conversation, right? Instead of just completely failing, right? It's a safe place to fail, right? So there's definitely learning points that we hit along the way.
Right. There's a lot of hands-on critique. Like you get to, everyone makes mistakes.
Right.
You make them now, like you said earlier, you make them now instead of later. Yeah. That's how I learned the best.
I mean, we're disassembling it. Like right now, one of the classes is going through and disassembling an O320. So they're able to make some mistakes on that engine because the engine is not airworthy.
Yeah.
Right. Before it gets reassembled, we're going to make sure we correct every one of those mistakes. But they're going through. I kind of was laughing at them a few weeks ago. They had gotten a little bit ahead of themselves, and they had taken a bunch of things apart, and they didn't label stuff, and they had stuff just in a big box, and they're like, half of them were like, I don't even know what to do. Like, I just now everybody was just going so fast. We have this big pile of hardware. We're all very confused. Like, I don't know how we're ever going to get this back together.
What did you do about that? Did you have to teach them? I mean,
yeah. So we went back and we showed them how we're able to identify all the parts based on their part numbers by looking in the manuals and doing these different things.
Like you were talking about.
And so, like, it was a really fun, like, it was a learning experience on how to figure out what parts they are. But it was also a learning experience on, hey, when we take things apart, we need to make sure that we label and we're organized and we're slow and we're following the technical data.
And if it wasn't that sort of environment, then they would make that mistake later and then not have had the skill on how to fix it.
Well, so we're developing good habits.
Yeah,
right?
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a fun learning experience for them.
Yeah. I saw when I went over there all the tape on the table. I don't know if that was a part of the same process.
Yeah, so that's part of the process. Yeah. So they only had half the table taped and they got sick of doing that. So
But I saw though, there was like, I was looking at it, I was like, oh, is that what that's called? That part, I was looking at it myself. So that's really cool. Well, to keep it moving, then I like that you mentioned some of the things that set the school apart. And I know that some of the students had mentioned maybe they had, is there students that had been to another school and then came to Thrust Institute of Maintenance?
Yeah, we have some students that have transferred from, the large school here in DFW. It's actually one of the largest schools, or the largest school in the country.
Mm.
And the feedback was, he came in with his parents, and we had a conversation. We actually have another one that's transferring in, going to start the middle of June.
Mm.
The biggest complaint that he had was, hey, the class sizes are so big. I'm not like able to ask. My instructor's never available for questions. When I do ask questions, I get the, what did the book say? Go look it up.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some of that, right? Like
Right.
sometimes a student needs to go find something in the book, but there should never be the attitude from an instructor of, well, what did the book say?
Right.
Right. Like
that's a different kind of response.
It's a different kind of response, and the tone behind it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're very particular on who we hire to be instructors here at Thrust. And I think that myself really sets that precedence, right? Like my availability to the students, the instructors see it. My availability to the instructors is part of what sets that tone, right? Like we're not here to see you fail.
Right.
I know when I talk to people that went to traditional A&P schools, especially people that are around my generation, my age, guys with my same amount of experience I have, they always said, when we sat down first day, on in-doc day, they said, look left and look right. Those people won't be here on graduation day. And they would start a class with 25 people and graduate with 7. Like that's not the school we want, right? We want to start a class with 11 and finish with 12, right? Like we want every person that we accept into the program to be successful. So we do interview. We have, we're making sure that you're the right fit, that you're available, that you have the right attitude to be in our program. Yeah. And then we're going to help you and be available to you every step of the way. Yeah. Right. Any questions that you have, I'm personally available 24/7. If you have, questions about work, you have questions about life, you have whatever, you can call me. Right.
Yeah. No,
I tell all my students that 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever, we're always available to you.
Yeah. And it seems like the classes that start together, I mean, the idea is that all of them end together. Yeah. But they all seem like, since they're so grouped together, they get really, it's like a group of, it's like a little, I mean, it sounds corny, but like a little family, but they're like siblings. That's how it looks like when I go over there.
Yeah. So, that's really what they turn into. I mean, they're friends, and they're going to be, they're going to be work colleagues or acquaintances or friends, or, you build these lifelong friendships, right? If you think about, you're going through this school together, it's fast, right? And it's not easy, right? And then they're studying outside of our 40 hours that they're putting in. Some of them get together and study together. Some of them, they're talking online, asking questions to each other, and then they're just talking about normal life. I think that 2 weeks ago, one of the classes, they all went to the aquarium together.
Oh, they were telling me about that.
Just like they're just having fun. They also, yeah,
I was like, I can't go.
Yeah, one of the classes is volunteering down at Dallas Executive on Saturdays. Maintaining warbirds, helping those guys out. And just all sorts of fun aviation stuff. They go to air shows together. They're just, enjoying and becoming young adults together.
Yeah. And they say, well, this isn't used in this context. They say it takes a village, right? But that's usually when it comes to raising someone. But I've noticed that people who stick together tend to succeed together. Yeah. And they grow off of each other. So I think that seems like it's a good culture that's going on over there. I like going over there just to visit you guys sometimes. So, you see me linger around every now and then. Y'all got a nice vending machine with a honey bun in it too. So I like that. But helps. John, I don't have a whole lot more to ask you. I think you covered everything else just through our conversation. I really just wanted everyone to have a good idea of maybe who it is that's running the school, what their background is, and even a little bit about the school. Because I don't know, when I'm looking to do something and I'm looking to spend a lot of money and I'm looking to execute a plan, I want to know what it is that I'm getting myself into. And I feel like maybe an episode like this and the following episodes will give a lot of insight onto what someone may be interested in. And I've been hearing a lot of good things from the students, so I thought it was a great idea to have you come in and start off the whole podcast this way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me, Zach.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I think this is really going to turn into, information about different career fields. I have kind of a list of guests that I've been thinking about, and people that we want to come in that work in different aspects. We're going to have people that come in that work for major airlines. We're going to have people that come in that work for smaller repair stations, people that work in helicopters, people that work in emergency medical services, people that have been chasing fires around the world their whole life.
Right.
People that's specialize in training.
Right. And I mean, I didn't even really know what it meant at first. Of course, I'm learning a lot of things here, but when I was doing my research, I realized there's not a whole lot of information out there in this format. And so, as y'all can see, we have a lot of plans for the YouTube channel that this is on right now. This is only the second video on the YouTube channel, but I really would like to ask you guys if you're enjoying this at all, or if anything that Jon has talked about is something you want to know about, especially the upcoming episodes of this podcast or even the series. We're going to have a lot of different series. We're just getting started. I would say it's a great idea to subscribe so that you guys can stay in tune with this. Even if you're just exploring or curious or considering coming to TIM or really going to any school, we're going to be putting out a lot of information.
So thrustinstitute.com. And like I said on the YouTube channel, if you could give us, me and Zach's favorite thing is a thumbs up. So like and subscribe. We definitely lots of more content coming in the future. And real informative stuff for the aircraft and or aircraft mechanics, so an airframe and power plant mechanic. That's a certificate that we hold.
Thank you, Jon, for joining us on the first episode of Nuts About Thrust. That was quite a mouthful. Damn it. That sounded crazy.
Thanks for joining us on our first episode of Nuts About Thrust. Like and subscribe, like Zach said. Give us a thumbs up, and we would love your comments on what you'd like to see in future episodes.